Hey friends, so I think this is the fourth video lecture on the chapter of middle childhood. I want to carry on with the topic of cognitive development. In the previous lecture, I introduced the idea of different kinds of intelligence. We talked a little bit about Piaget, then we moved on to Steinberg's. Now I want to address Gardner's multiple intelligence. I do actually have like a quiz activity to sort of reinforce some of the ideas. And really the main point of this whole discussion about intelligence is there's different ways to think about knowing. And you could spend your whole career studying cognition and different ways of knowing. So yeah, that's really the point. And when we're thinking about children, or we're thinking about intelligence, or we're thinking about children's developmental intelligence, or even adults' intelligence, it's important to consider that there are different ways of knowing and there are different kinds of things to know. And that's really what these different theorists have offered us is words and ways of thinking about it. So you got Gardner's his model, and his model suggests that there are at least 9 different ways to know, or different abilities, different intellectual abilities. You've got the linguists who are good with words. You've got the logical, mathematical who are good with numbers. You have the spatial who are good with sort of positioning, probably would be good at puzzles. You've got a musical intelligence, which is good with instruments and music. And you've got kinesthetic, which is good with they know how to use their body and how their body is in space. Interpersonal, which is they're good at getting along with other people. Interpersonal, which is they're good at understanding themselves. Naturalistic, they have a natural inclination to understand the natural world. And then the existential, which is sort of an intelligence about the more profound questions of life. And a person may be very good at one and very terrible at the other. But when we conceptualize intellect, when we conceptualize intelligence in different kinds of ways, and we can more deeply appreciate human variation and human knowledge and different ways of knowing. So now your book sort of transitions into another sort of a theme that we've seen throughout, and that's this model of cognitive development as an information processing. So, and under information processing, we have learning, memory, problem solving, and you'll see some of these same themes that we talked about earlier, even in this chapter, with the myelinization, which is the coding of the neurons, which speeds up information processing, the development of the cortex. This is the executive center, and the synaptic pruning, which simply means that we're not using the connection that the connections that we don't use simply. So really our thinking is becoming more specialized. We're becoming better at certain things. And we're in the ability to inhibit irrelevance. So we're not paying attention to as many things. And I keep forgetting we're talking about middle childhood here. At the same time, the more that we know, there's one model of memory which argues that you have this set of knowledge, and then all new information gets anchored to that old knowledge. So the more a child experiences and the more of a knowledge base they have, it's sort of as if there's an anchor, and that anchor allows new information to be attached to that old information. It acts so an expanding knowledge base means more things get added to it. We also introduced this idea of a metacognition, which is a fancy way of saying that a child is developing the cognitive understanding, the cognitive ability to think about the things that they know, so they can begin to reflect on their own knowledge, and they understand what they don't understand, or understand, hey, I understand what they do. And then as children get older, then we start really thinking philosophically about those things, and critical thinking skills are enhanced with this more sophisticated way of knowing. And we're going to define critical thinking as the ability to evaluate information, and the ability to think about the value of information. All right, so this chapter shifts us over into a discussion about standardized tests and intellectual testing. And before we shift into talking more specifically about that, there's also a brief discussion about basically research methods and some important things. I'm not going to quiz you on this sort of stuff, but I feel like I would be remiss by not to at least talk about what it is in the textbook. And the thing about any sort of any sort of survey or testing is they have to have two things, and they have to be reliable and valid. If you're going to go on and ever take a research methods class, maybe you're already learning this stuff. If you're studying, if you're in the healthcare field, you learn about what it means to be reliable and valid. Reliable, let's start with valid. Valid simply means that what you think you're measuring, you're actually measuring. So for an intelligence test to actually be a good intelligence test, it has to be measuring intelligence. For any kind of test, it has to actually measure what you think it's measuring and not measuring something else. A reliable test is something that's going to get you the same performance every time. So if you've ever taken a survey and you're like, man, this is asking the same questions over and over and over again, well, that speaks to these two elements. The reason it asks the same question in different ways is because if it's really measuring what it's supposed to be measuring, you're going to give it the same kind of response every single time. And then we give the same test to a lot of different people, or maybe to you over and over again, and it should get the same result in order for it to be reliable and valid. When a test becomes standardized, what that means is a lot of people have taken the test and there has been a pattern in the results. And to be standardized in the context of intelligence testings means that there's like an average, means that there is an average result for children, for 6-year-olds, and there's an average result for children who are 14, and then your child takes the test and you compare it against the average result, and that's what it means to be standardized. So my child scored higher than the average, or my child scored lower than the average. There's a phenomena that is referenced in your textbook called the Flynn effect, and the Flynn effect is a phenomena that the average score tends to go up, and or the average IQ score goes up over time. So that means it would be kind of unfair to compare the test of your grandfather score with your grandfather against, say, your child today, because based on the Flynn effect, you should see it's not that your child today is necessarily more intelligent than your grandfather was, but probably the questions, and this is another issue that gets raised with IQ testing, is they are inherently biased. They're going to be biased against the information that is considered worthy of testing in the era, in the time period in which they are tested, and they are often biased against different social groups. What I mean by that is they're often biased against poor people. Poor people have a certain set of knowledge, but when it is college educated people who are writing the test, they have a different set of knowledge. It does not mean poor people are not intelligent. This goes back to the idea of different kinds of intelligence, right? When I took the ACT, in my memory, I don't know if it was exactly this, but in my memory, the scores the following year were increased. If you got, like, I'm making the number up, but if you got a 22, the year I took it, the year scores were bumped up because it was recognized that there was a bias built into the test. A really classic example has to do with, like, when the test includes questions about polo scoring versus throwing dice, right? Who knows polo? People of privilege, economic privilege. Who is more likely to know how to play dice? Poor people. So when we only ask questions about polo and not about dice, I hope that makes some sense. Okay. So there's also a brief discussion about the difference between mental age and IQ. IQ is, so we take these tests, we get a result, and it's supposed to be divided by in our chronological age. I've never taken an IQ test. I've taken the standardized ACT, SAT. I took the graduate entrance exam, which is a standardized, and I took the law school entrance exam, but I've never taken actually an IQ test. Maybe some of you have. Going to try to talk about this one before I go too much over my 10 minutes, my 11 minutes. The introduction of spectrum of intellectual developmental disabilities. And what you have over here on this scale is you have what we call a bell curve. And in the realm of research methods, bell curves are the idea of a good test means that you should have a few people that do very badly, you should have a few people that do very well, but the majority of people should fall in the middle. And what this scale represents is 70% of people who take the IQ, the standard IQ tests, score between 85 and 115. People who fall below that, we call those people intellectual disability. And what does it say? 1% of the population, typically male, fall way down here. When we fall way, this would be an intellectual disability. And then the people that fall way up here at the top, it says gifted and talented people that score above 130. These are considered to be gifted people. What does that thingy say there? It says, I can't read all the names. Bobby Fletcher, he was a chess player. Albert Einstein had 101. I can't actually read those things. And then Down syndrome people typically score very low on the scale. That's what we would call an intellectual disability. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and in the next lecture, we're going to talk a little bit more about testing in school.